right. Well, welcome to the happy hour. Got a few people in.
Well, thanks for having me. Good morning.
Yeah, thanks for coming in, Shawn. So, right now everyone's ramping up to be, elected into office. You're running. We've got who else is running? I think you're the only. Well,
there's 3 people in District 1, and then there's another district open too, right?
There's 2.
Okay.
One predominantly for Stansbury and the Erda, Lake Point area. I mean, those that are Grantsville and West and southeast corner of Tooele City and south, those ones are locked in. The 2 current county commissioners, Kendall Thomas and Tom Tripp, that I serve with now, are guaranteed to roll over for the next 2 years of their 4-year term in those areas. So there are 3 districts that are open.
Okay. Well, they're doing that so they don't uproot all of the county management all at once and bring in, 5 new guys
or gals,
or 5 new individuals,
or maybe something else. I mean, just saying.
Well,
5 new people,
5 new people, and then just hand them the keys and say, "Good luck." This is how you lock the door when you're done. Bye. You know what I mean?
It's people's house. Door's always open.
Yeah. So, I mean, that'd be kind of rough. So I can get that. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What brought you out here?
Well, born in Salt Lake Valley. My earliest memories were at the family homestead, what was left of it. It was a single bedroom, adobe whitewashed home, like legit settler era. Great-great-grandfather emigrated directly from Scotland in the Fort Union area. And my single mom and I lived there for a while until the state needed to buy it because of growth in the southern part of that valley.
There's a big mall sitting there now.
Well, it was the freeway.
Oh,
it was 215 that they were in the middle of constructing, and they needed that. It stood in the way like many other properties. And so it's one of those portions that are actually dug deep, and drops quite a bit. At that early age, my mom decided, because of California's greater pay parity for women relative to the same job performed, and probably just her own leanings. And let's face it, like, the weather is great down there. We moved to Southern California.
Oh, yeah.
So I oftentimes say that I was raised in Southern California, moved around a lot there as well, and then finished high school in Sandy and was living with my grandparents. And while my mom went through a couple of life changes in Southern California with a divorce and custody of my little brother and such. And so I lost my California residency. Ironically, I was really looking forward to a couple of university situations for college down there, but it was just too prohibitively expensive. And so went to college in Salt Lake, and from there met Mrs. Milne, and I usually refer to her in that sort of way because she's been in education for her whole career, and that's usually what she gets called by the kids, So we met each other in college, and we started looking for a place to lay down our roots and have our iconic little piece of the American dream, land ownership. And for over a year and a half, we went on a double date, as lame as that sounds, with a friend of mine who was working at the Kennecott smelter. And with his situation and ours, just banks at the time. Now, ironic, because a few years later, you could basically fog a mirror, chew gum, and walk, and they'd throw money at you. But
are you sure you had to fog a mirror? I mean, we had a whole collapse.
I was going to say that. Yeah, I was going to say that. So anyway, for over a year and a half, we looked from Santaquin to Farmington, and we either qualified in some of the most, rough areas that we were like, that's probably not the best place to raise a family, or got outright denied. So then one day he gave me a call and said, "Hey, I put money down on a place in Tooele." And I said, "Tooele, isn't that where they burn stuff?" And, obviously, as that would show, I didn't know much about the place at the time. But it worked out, and ironically, we chose the same model home right next to each other on neighboring lots. And originally just thought it'd be a few years out here and build up some equity and probably move back out to the Salt Lake Valley. But the community honestly just grew on us very quickly. And I'll never forget the day I knew that we were here for the long term. And that was when Mrs. Milne, Renee, got a job here at the local high school, Tooele High. She was working at Granite School District at the time. And she had said, just the scene that she saw in the hallways was so great. She's like, I'm really excited about the opportunity. She didn't know yet, of course, whether or not the day of an interview she was going to get it, but I just knew there was an energy about her. And having spent, a few years here, I just knew. And so that's kind of that. Now, what got me involved in politics is a little bit different. In that neighborhood, something developed on one of the empty lots. Like most developers will do, they sell lots to a myriad of builders so that they don't all look the same, or that's, fairly common. It's not universal, but one of those builders went belly up and they claimed bankruptcy, and it went and drug through the system like it normally does. It takes a while. And a builder came in with modular homes and sat it down on an empty lot one day, several years after, it had just been empty, and all the other lots had built out because they were, the other builders were successful. And it got a lot of us very concerned, and we're like, whoa, this doesn't go with our HOA. This doesn't go with the architectural standards and stuff like that. And so a bunch of us were very concerned and wondered what was going on. And so we went over to City Hall. The first meeting we showed up at was planning and zoning. And there were about 30 of us, and the meeting went by, and I will never forget the chairman at the time, who's now a good friend. And he said, don't know what y'all are here for. None of you chose to come up during any of the items. We don't normally get 30 people, which I've now come to, understand is very, very true, still sadly 20 years later. And what are y'all here for? And I looked to my left and I looked to my right, and neighbors were looking back at me, and I thought, I guess that means they're kind of expecting me to go up to the podium. So I did so, and I made our case, and they said, well, we're regretful to tell you that, they're already zoned for that style of home fits within your neighborhood, and you really need to go talk to the city council. So next week we went to the city council, and about only half of us showed up, and did the same thing all over again, and learned what grandfathering means, learned why once you're in the system and you're working through it legally, you don't get to change the rules mid-game. And many of us as kids remember that. You'd go over to a friend's house and you were winning, and all of a sudden the rules would change, right? And you're like, whoa, that's not fair. And they'd be like, hey, my house, my rules. That didn't strike a chord well with any of us when we were kids. And so it is with American law too. And so that kind of, that angered and frustrated several of us. Now, we were successful because we as neighbors, not the city, worked directly with the developer, who was still kind of in the game, because they were developing still within Tooele City, but not in our neighborhood anymore, and the builder, and said, we want to see some changes. And we were able to affect that change at a local neighborhood level. But the city had given us our first dose of reality of what grandfathering means and zoning and everything else. And so it's kind of a slow burn from there. A year later, the mayor at the time, Charlie Roberts, asked me if I'd be on planning and zoning. And I thought, you betcha. And, just from there, I've been involved in the community in one way or another and really enjoyed it.
So what you're saying is the planning and zoning process is very complicated, hard to understand. And you know what? I go to a lot of those meetings once in a while just to try to keep up with what's going on in the community. And I don't consider myself to be completely ignorant of politics, but the planning and zoning stuff it's a complicated process. I don't understand it. Is there what is the best educational tool that someone can use to understand this process? Is there like a YouTube video or how-to manual? How does someone go about learning it?
Excellent
without
question.
experiencing it?
I don't know the quick answer to that. I had been sitting as an audience member. I was very frustrated. And several neighbors were as well. But once we got what we wanted, most everybody else stopped, going to periodic planning and zoning commission meetings. But I'm just stubborn enough, and I wanted to better understand, exactly like you just asked, how the process worked. I was told that what we thought was the process wasn't it. So I wanted to learn, well, then what is it? And so I can probably count on one hand how many meetings I missed that first year between city council and planning and zoning. I mean, I guess you could either say I'm just that much of a policy wonk or a nerd, or I was just that frustrated, or combination. But about 6 months in, I remember there was a night when something else came up. And I don't remember all the details really well today, but I just remember the night, and I remember the epiphany I had, and I was like, that's why they couldn't have helped us. And it was a very gut-wrenching feeling, because prior to that, I think I was just mostly frustrated and angry. But as I learned the process slowly, David, I realized that this is really complicated. And then I was on planning and zoning, right? A year later, I was asked by the mayor, and I accepted, and city council approved. And And I served then for 5 years in planning and zoning. And I would say that I was still really trying to figure it out about my second year on planning and zoning. So that takes you from a year of being in the audience, a year on planning and zoning already, and that second year. Now there's a guy by the name of David Church. He's an absolute professional. He knows everything there is about real estate law and zoning law in the state of Utah. Just a really great, humble guy. And he taught some classes, and he'd come out and teach us as planning and zoning commissioners. And I remember I took the city up on the offer to pay for me to go to a training that was being hosted down in Moab. And so I went, and there was only one other person from Tooele County that went to this day or two training down in Moab to learn about some of those intricacies. So it was an investment on behalf of the city. They reimbursed and paid for the, tuition for it. But I felt that it was important enough to learn what some of those nuances were, because I was constantly conflating or mixing up several phases. There's the phasing that, like with the Temple residential rezone, there's the rezone, and then there's the plat approval. They're not the same. But oftentimes you think because the developer comes to you with a graphic of where the lot lines will be, where the roads will exactly be, and it's human nature. We're going to take that and say, that's then what I expect it to be. But a rezone is just that. And they may show you graphically an example so you know it, but actually the plat approval is actually later. And it's not to be confused with the elevation drawings and approving construction materials or design guidelines. And there's just, you're right. It is very confusing, but I can see with retrospect why that is. When you grant these things, you're granting the landowner a right, a vested right. And it's kind of the American way that we believe in private property rights. And so if you're going to take those away or modify them somehow, there's a process to do that. And it can be very laborious. It can be very confusing because you have attorneys on both sides, and typically even some in the middle. Say residents nearby may have, attorneys and interests. And before long, if anything, I've found an alternate meaning to the word politics is compromise. It could easily just as be collaboration. And to hear all sides, it oftentimes takes a lot of time.
It is that it is a mending of the
General plan.
the ideal of private property and the mending of government controlling what happens. I would argue I don't feel the existence of private property when I've got to pay a lease on it every year. That kind of shoots that in the foot, but that's my own political leaning. I'm extreme on my political leaning. I understand that.
There are a lot of people that feel like you do.
Yeah, and then go past them, and I'm somewhere down there.
Okay.
I'm as extreme as it gets on my political leanings. As extreme. I'm an anarchist. I don't see success in government. I haven't seen government be successful where private industry would be more successful or equally too. But aside from that, I want to talk more about that temple. I've seen a lot of it seems angers around the temple was going to get built, and people cheered and hurrahed, and the neighbors around it, a lot of them cheered. And then when they talked about making the smaller lots around there to a lot of people think it's to recover some of the cost of building the temple. I don't know, but what's going on with that? Where does all that stand right now?
Well, interesting development this week. There are a number of residents, as you say, that live in close proximity to the proposed temple and are not happy about the so the church, the Mormon church, or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, has a number of sub entities, and one of them is a for-profit enterprise that acts as a developer. And the church has on several occasions, point blank in meetings with the county, told us that because the temple would be built where it is and the expense of water and sewer infrastructure, not a septic or leach field, and a bona fide tie into a culinary grade water system for those that just come to the temple would be a significant cost. Okay, mm-hmm. True. I mean, I see that, from the city before being a county commissioner and now as a county commissioner.
Could you imagine a temple's septic and leach field system?
Right. And that's part of the concern.
That whole field just northwest of that would never need to run a sprinkler again and never have to fertilize, because that'd be a temple pumping fertilization at that all nonstop.
So there's that significant expense to it. And, you know, there's a typical way that they'll pay for that kind of infrastructure. And they're saying, you know, out of this roughly 200 acres, roughly a little less than that, they only need so much for the temple, the gardens, the grounds, the parking lot, stake center behind it. And then the rest they want to sell off so that they can reimburse themselves for the majority of that infrastructure cost. Okay. Not so much the temple, but the infrastructure is needed for the temple. This is what they've told us. And like any applicant, that's where we're at. Now, given what you just said about your leanings, I think you can appreciate that it is not my business as a government regulator to be in their business. They need to conform to our standards, the standards that we as a community have decided, let's create county code or laws to make sure that that's what governs how things play out. And so they've said they want to sell that surrounding land in order to reimburse them for the temple costs. Well, they came to us originally with one idea that had almost 100 more homes, almost 100 more residential units to that surrounding acreage. And after many months of meeting with some immediate proximate neighbors, the county and others, they heard and they came back with about 70 fewer homes, residential units. And we've asked them on 2 such meetings subsequent to that, can you go any, you know, lower on your quantity of parcels, translating roughly to larger lot sizes? And they've said, no, we could, but then the market won't bear what the per household cost of that extra infrastructure will have to be. And many of us are aware that there's a housing affordability gap, right? There's so many households, and the statewide, they estimate it to be at about 50,000 households in the entire state. So certainly not Tooele County specific share of affordable housing that isn't available for folks and what they earn their wages to be, right? Common, you know, metric is not to spend more than a third of your household monthly income towards your living quarters.
The arguments between building a single family, like average house, and that allows them to bring in more water. They have to put in more water infrastructure for that.
Well, they'll convert from what they use on site. They own the water for what they currently use the 200 acres for. Right?
Versus building the larger, more established homes. And it seems like they're trying to find a happy medium there where the surrounding neighbors are happy with not having a subdivision moved in their neighborhood versus the church wanting to recover some of that expense of setting up that area. Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, it's a challenge though, right? By compromise, it implies that all sides are giving up something in order to get something as well. It's not just a lose-lose proposition, but I don't know that you could either call it a win-win because you're giving up something that you previously said you wanted.
With some of the struggle with, we hear a lot of concern about water here in Tooele specifically. Maybe the people who live out there are right. You know, the smaller homes tend to use more water just because there's more sources.
You'd be correct in the quantification of more homes, but the incorrect part is that the larger the lot, the more water folks use outside.
Very true.
The least efficient way that humans use water is outside. I mean, we think about it. Here we are at your lovely home, and much like yours, I have some sod. That's not native, right? I mean, we're the second driest state in the union. I know, right?
That was there when the Pilgrims came.
And so the least efficient way to use water is outside. So the more acreage you have, unless you're okay with, you know, native vegetation or xeriscaping, and to some degree, larger lots here do. I want
green concrete is what I want.
Hey, I had an uncle that lived in Magna. Most jazz fans would know him, John Sudsbury. He was like a super fan, and that's exactly what he did.
I like the way he thinks.
Well, a lot of his neighbors didn't.
I want
he was
green
a special
concrete
guy.
all the way out to the front, and then I'll get pots. And, you know, I don't know, foot around, and I'll plant grass in those, maybe 3 or 4 of them, and I'll be happy.
So another way to look at this would be like, say we got 100 people that are going to live in this area, right? Yeah. And if you give them big lots, you got to have longer pipes, and longer pipes require more water. Whereas if you condense them down, you got less pipage. You need to focus less water in that area. Would that kind of be like the the circle of thinking that they're going in with the dense housing?
Not so much the water in your analogy, but I will say, I want to come back, but I'm going to skip forward. Let's say that you're the developer and you just made that rationale, right?
Mhm.
When you're done, you've made your profit, you're out of there. The neighbors now occupy their residences, their lots, but who takes care of that infrastructure?
The
The
city.
residents through either their city or their county, right? Or their special improvement district like Stansbury Park has. Stansbury Park Improvement District just deals with their water and sewer. Their Stansbury Park Service Agency deals with all the other quality of life niceties that typically involve green space, the parks, the golf course and the like. Well, it's left to ratepayers in that case. So things degrade with time and use, right? We all know that, and we call that depreciation in the accounting world. And so you're going to have a certain usable life of your car, your home, your roof, whatever that might be, and pipes are no different.
Right.
Per household, the more households you have to help defray that cost, economically speaking, the better, because the lower per household cost of maintenance. Well, when you have large open lots, that actually becomes a more expensive proposition per household. Now, you get to decide as a community whether or not that's worth it. And Erda certainly will get that opportunity this fall. Do they want a more expensive lifestyle relative to communities of smaller lot sizes? It's a catch-22 because it's not just that simple and black and white. But if they opt for it, yes, they may become the highest tax per household kind of community because there's not a lot of commercial. And most Utahns don't know this. And this was interesting when we had these church folks in a meeting with us at the county not too long ago. I brought up this element that we know well, because that's how we look at our revenue stream. Residences only pay the same rate of taxes, the same 0.00 whatever on your property tax bill that then goes out to probably 6 or 7 decimal points. We as residents pay the same rate as a business down the street. But we, if you're like me and like most of us, only own one home, your primary residence, you're only paying that rate multiplied on 55% of your home's value. The business down the street, whether it's Walmart, Denny's, Joe Bob's little homegrown shop on Main Street, they're paying the same rate. So they're paying the same taxes on 100% of their value. So they're paying more taxes.
So residential single residence it doesn't knock the rate down, but it knocks the amount of your
you get a 45% coupon.
Yeah, you get a 45%. Now, if you buy a second home, does that
100% value? Now you're being treated
Okay.
like the business.
okay?
Even if it's just yours private, secondary, you use it down in Bryan Head or St. George during the winter, whatever the case may be. But on the primary, and the rationale for that is homeownership is the American dream.
Mhm.
For a lot of folks, that is the single largest asset that you have. Becomes a nest egg later in life if you didn't have one otherwise. 20 years ago, it was a pretty popular thing to have reverse mortgages. And if you didn't have a significant savings otherwise, you could still live in your home and you could basically lose some of your value after you passed away, for those that, sadly didn't have another opportunity. So the idea is give people the opportunity for home ownership. Well, it artificially subsidizes it then, because as a business owner for over 20 years, like other businesses, I'm thinking, and this is part of what really changed my mindset and why I started to get more involved, because I'm like, wait, I'm paying taxes twice, but I only get to vote once. So think about that. It's a very American philosophy that taxation without representation is very frustrating. As a homeowner, I have as much vote as David or Jared. As a business owner, I don't have any vote. My business is still inside Tooele city limits, but I don't have a second vote. Yet I'm paying significantly more in taxes, not by the rate as we've just established, but by the fact that I'm taxed at 100% of whatever value, right? And so I'm taxed without representation. There are some businesses that are owned by folks here. They might even be a national franchise, but they don't live in our county. And yet they generate taxes that you and I benefit from. So that water and sewer system, coming back to an example, we're the beneficiaries of the schools as good as they are, our roads as good as they are, our policing services as good as they are, not because of the taxes we do pay. I'm not trying to discount the taxes we pay, but we don't have the, more businesses. So we come back to this Erda example. Erda doesn't have a ton of businesses. They have some good businesses. Annexation plans from Grantsville and Tooele City may change that significantly from the study that came out just at the beginning of the calendar
What's
year.
the annexation plans?
Would be basically everything in between Stansbury Park as we all know it and experience it to be, Grantsville, Tooele, all the way up to the Salt Lake County, line on the top of the mountain, which is in and of itself a little unique. Most municipalities do not take up that much, open space and wildland fire potential, which will be interesting because right now, if a fire happens there, the county has to pay for it. Well, we have a diversified tax base, right? Once they incorporate, they're responsible for firefighting costs on that mountain. There could be some benefits to that too. They'll get to dictate what the zoning up the mountain is, even though most of it isn't developable either because of the steep grade or the interest of ownership that would be in there, have no intentions of it. But there's some opportunities, but there are some risks. And so anyway, we come back to this residential development around the temple, right? They're not going to be hugely profitable in any sense of the word, either for the possible incorporated city or town of Erda or the county. It will be what it is, just a neighborhood, right? There's not going to be a large commercial component around it. So the church, in its desire to sell to its development arm, the development arm says, well, we need to right price this, because what they've very bluntly stated to the county is, unlike what they have at the Bountiful and Draper Temple, they do not just want a bunch of McMansions around it that look like only the rich can be in proximity to their temple.
So they also,
I think that's a relevant.
no,
yeah,
I like that.
sense.
I like, they also want to have, they want to have a more, I guess for lack of a better word, Unitarian message with this by building single family starter homes.
it's a mix. I
And
mean,
being-
they're still going to have half-acre lots.
Yeah, and being close to a temple, it's probably going to be a nice neighborhood, and you will get decent response from law enforcement there, because it's going to be a dense area located near a, I shouldn't say dense, nothing in Utah's dense, but denser than we're used to area located.
Where'd you
near
grow up?
In Grantsville.
I just don't usually hear someone who's grown up here refer to what is proposed around the temple as not dense. Matter of fact, the folks that are adamantly against it usually critique it by calling it high density.
Oh, well, compared to what they're used to in Erda, it's
True.
it's I mean, but it's not high density. It's,
I concur with you, having
Even-
seen a lot of metro areas throughout the world.
oh
but-
yeah, even
but I can't
some
argue
other,
that it's denser than 1 acre lots, right?
yeah.
I wish I had a 1 acre lot or a half acre lot. I
Yeah.
mean, if you're complaining about a half acre lot here in this area, you don't have much sympathy from me, I guess. But I think
Well, it sounds to me like the Erda people don't want to see that. They're worried about the aesthetic change of putting a subdivision, a single family home, or I don't know what you'd call it, as a starter family home subdivision in their area. And I think Erda's, leery about that. And I understand their point.
Yeah, and
And
it's a valid concern.
and I understand the church's point of, well, let's make it look like we're, we want to spread our value image across all, socioeconomic demographics. And I
I think
understand
that's
that point.
admirable as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can't fault either side, which I have completely stayed away from that debate because, that's,
Well, let's come back to that definition of politics that I said an alternate is about compromise, right? So they've spent a lot of time trying to compromise. They've met specifically with those that are the most bothered and concerned by what has been proposed and what was previously proposed. Residents in the area tell us at the county that they perceive the meeting to have gone differently than polite. The 3 commissioners have listened to audio of that recording that neighbors made, and we universally seem to differ. But it doesn't mean that they weren't heard, just means that there was compromise, right? And so the latest rendition, for example, shows 30 acres now carved out that would be park, open space, immediately adjacent to the England Estates subdivision, the ones that are the most closely established and would be abutting this proposed development. And then the Clegg family has a development as well that's up against 36, and the land development side, Suburban Land Reserve, not to be confused with the ecclesiastical side of the church, okay, Suburban Land Reserve, or SLR, has proposed half-acre lots and an 8-foot cinder block wall, or CMU, some sort of masonry type of wall, immediately up against the Clegg part. Now, they've attempted to do that as a compromise. We've heard from the neighbors that they do not find that to be a good enough compromise. And they've tried to concentrate the density, the greater density, towards the southeast corner at the signalized intersection, which makes sense because chances are good you're going to want to have those folks not be on Bryan Way or Liddell Lane to the west. You're going to want them closer so that you're cutting down on whether it's emissions and air quality is your number one factor, or whether it's maintenance of lane miles, whatever the case may be. They're going to probably be like most of us, and they're going to commute, right? Mm-hmm. So getting them closer to the vein of commuting that they're going to need to use is, makes some good sense. But it also has the aesthetic quality that you brought up, Jared, of putting those smaller lots further away from the established community.
And you said a 30-acre park. So whether that has swing sets or a soccer field or whatever, that causes a gap. And then the larger homes are on the outside, and then they get smaller in, which I don't know. I don't know. I understand why the people of Erda are leery about this. They want to keep that non-commercial feel to their neighborhood, and it will bring more commercial stuff out there.
Or to Stansbury Park or Tooele City.
Yes.
I mean, it's not a given that it would be at Erda,
but it
will. Extra households like all of us, we go shopping for goods and services. Mm-hmm. That's just what we do as humans, right? Because we are not autonomous, no matter how much, some folks in another state try to create an autonomous zone. And the irony now of big poster boards of things they need, and they want folks to give them. We believe in commerce. And so David will specialize in being the baker, and you'll be specializing in being the blacksmith, and I might specialize in leather work or whatever that is. And we either barter or have this monetary system to do so. And most of us love support. We love the idea of supporting local. Wish more folks in Tooele County would support local and help our small mom and pop businesses. But regardless, whatever that commerce looks like, it's going to be somewhere. And the more residential rooftops you have, the more retail you're likely to attract as a result. It's not a given that it'll be manufacturing. It's not a given that it'll be logistics, though we do have some of those things within our valley. So the tax base will increase over time, but there is a direct correlation. Like I love how Facebook always has, Olive Garden's coming or Costco's coming. Folks, the biggest irony is we're not going to get those until we have a lot more residential rooftops. No. Having gone to the International Conference of Shopping Centers, ICSC, to recruit some brands in my previous life as a city councilman, they were really direct. They don't come before 90 to 120,000 residential rooftops. And even then it's a little bit, fluid. What the discretionary income levels of your community look like matter to the 90 or 120. So it's not just about an absolute number. It's about the mix of that as well. So we're not, as you can tell, we're not going to get a Costco anytime soon. Same thing with, some of these other large chains, which could be good. If you want to encourage mom and pops, then please encourage them now. Prove it with your shopping decisions now, rather than going across the county line and helping somebody else's school district, helping somebody else's road department, helping somebody else's police department. But yeah, it will bring commerce, and it may come to Erda. It may be that it's Stansbury Park and that Woodbury shopping center. Woodbury's the name of the developer where Solberg's is at, or, someplace north in Tooele City.
So if speaking about purchasing local, so the last meeting I went to, you guys were replacing the windows on the county building, and there was a debate. So this is a fantastic question about buying local.
Yeah,
you know what I'm going to talk about.
No, it's okay. Yeah. So
bring it. Okay. You had 4 different contracts, and I think Phil's Glass was like, 3 different contracts, and Phil's Glass was like maybe $4,000 or $6,000 above everybody else.
Above the other 2 from Salt Lake Valley. Correct.
So you have to calculate, like, all right, what would they pay in taxes for the county versus, the other contracts wouldn't pay taxes in the county. How did you guys resolve that contract? Because it kind of seemed like there were some different opinions between the commissioners, and I want to hear your point of view, because you always seem to have the most interesting point of view between the three of you. So if you would tell me a little bit about how you guys came to the resolution on that contract.
Well, this is really easy. The resolution was we decided because of the budget situation with COVID, we're not doing it this year. So we punted, but not because of the politics.
The ultimate win.
Yeah. But I'll tell you where we were, because, you know, I appreciate that you brought that up. That's the reason why the legislative branch is supposed to be more than one person, right? The same wise founding fathers that created the executive branch to be of one believed that when it came to legislative action, it should have the opportunity for a melting pot of ideas, right? A diverse way of looking at things. And the current commission definitely is that. And it's been that way since I've been in, at least. I can tell you that typically in a broken vote, you know, more often than not, I'm the odd man out. So I'm okay with that, because you win some, you lose some. And anybody in a successful relationship, like, I want to back up for a moment to talk about that, and then I'll come to that specific. Compromise is the key, right? It's what keeps us all civil, is you recognize that you're willing to give up some things in order to get some other things from the greater body. And it's no different in politics. And you have to decide when you're going to throw a fit. And I probably had a real hard challenge with that when I first came in, because there were some tough circumstances, and it seemed like there were a lot of tough fits to be thrown and change the way some folks were thinking about spending our tax dollars and performing services for us. But it also meant that we as a local culture had to kind of change some things, because we as taxpayers were not paying for as much of what we thought we were, because some really successful businesses and the Army through the feds were paying a lot of our quality of life. And when that money went away, we didn't realize we weren't paying as much of that bill as we needed to be. And thus taxes come in, because it's the only thing that local government can control. So you have to learn to compromise, right? And you have to learn to say, well, gosh, if I really want those services, I'm going to have to pay more, or whatever the case may be. And it is when you come to a vote. And so we did have a really good debate that night. I remember it well, and we've talked about it a couple of times since. There were at least two of us that were willing to go with the higher bid, because we perceived, at least the two of us that did so, we perceived that out of a almost $250,000 replacement cost of all the windows and doors in the county building that's over 40 years old, and you can, if you move your head just right like this, you can see daylight come through some of the window gaps. We perceived that there to be a de minimis enough value to the extra $6,000 that to choose out of the three, the one who is local, who employs local people, pays local taxes, and is locally keeping our community more vibrant and diverse, was worth it. All right. Now, that being said, there was not a decision to be made that night. You know, it was pretty obvious where the vote was going to break, you know, 2 out of 3 of us. But there is this perception that government should always choose the lowest cost. But that assumes that everything else is equal, right? And so 2 of us at least were saying, but we don't perceive that it's equal, because there's 2 that are going to go and enrich somebody else's business. And we have nothing against them. We want them to be successful. They're another human. They're another Utah, you know, whatever the case may be, but they're not here, and we want to support ourselves first. Right. And so that's kind of where the debate was. And again, we put it on hold. I mean, the decision was made to proceed with that, but we felt like the bigger decision was, given the uncertainty of our budget right now, when personal households are going through some of the same kind of anxiety, and our receipts are down. I mean, with some of those businesses being closed, that means government receipts were down too. Our revenue stream was just as affected. I think I heard in one of your recent episodes that something about a city worker, it doesn't matter to them because they're still getting their paycheck. And that, I think it may have been with Jason, but that's not entirely true, because like it does affect us, and there may be a lag, but we're all in this together. We really are.
Eventually it catches up.
Yeah.
The food chain does catch up.
Yeah.
So that you want to talk about that incident with the permitting? I mean, this would be a good segue.
Well, yeah, we can roll right into that. Jason's watching right now, as a matter of fact.
Good.
So, they were going to have that Utah Business Revival concert up at the Ampitheatre up there, and there was a lot of fight over it amongst the people, and a lot of fight over it through legislation and everything else, and in the courts. The most vocal people were against it, but there were 2 polls that came out, one by Channel 2 and another poll I think someone just set up on there, and the dominant win was the people were for it. That could be because out here we don't really feel the crunch of the beer flu. We didn't notice a drastic didn't notice a lot of people hurt, sick, injured. Not a lot of loss of life out here in the county. Yeah.
Don't jinx
From
us.
Well, we just got to state facts as they are.
Correct. I get it.
You know, part of being in this country is we're bold. We're brave. We're not gonna, you know, shutter our windows on a whisper 300 miles away. And that's why this country got great, because it was bold and it was brave. It did an experiment in free market capitalism. That's what brought us to this point. That's why we dominated the earth. If we'd have played around with mercantilism or some goofy French socialism, we'd have never got this far. We just wouldn't have. But so my issue with it is I don't want to go into any of the personal parts, but my issue with it is the perception was, went to court, got shot down, no, unanimous against it. And then at the same time, the same weekend, the county has big events going on their property. So it looks to me like the county used its monopoly on force to ensure that competition didn't happen with them.
Except that we didn't. And there are some significant differences.
Okay,
So the racetrack UMC right next door is privately owned.
okay.
We don't profit off that. It's not how that works. They had an event going on of fewer than 1,000, and we had 2 events at Deseret Peak Complex, fewer than 1,000.
Okay.
I know and saw how it was successfully spun, that the motocross event at Deseret Peak Complex was thousands of people, and yet we have the numbers to prove from the event organizer that's not the case.
Okay.
And it was the same assurance that they gave us a month earlier when they went through the permitting process, per se, because there are 2 significant differences about Deseret Peak Complex of 200 acres and the racetrack of 500 acres versus a 40-acre parcel with no improvements. They are significantly different, right? You have permanent fire suppression at the 2 permanent facilities. You have permanent restrooms and hand washing stations, parking lots where folks can safely park and not be on top of cheatgrass that could light fire with a hot exhaust. 40-acre parcel where, prior to the conversations that we were having with them, the week of notice that they gave us, and I'm grateful that Jason heard that. I mean, it was clear that he heard that part where he knocked down some weeds and made room for some additional parking spaces. Great. Well, that's all a permit process, no matter if it's ours or anybody else's, or the fact that this 1,000 or more, that's a state law. Eric didn't get to avoid that going down to Iron County and holding his event last night. Matter of fact, I have to admit, I read the newspaper article from the Tribune after he said, hey, we've been welcomed by Iron County and we're going to hold our event down there. And I took a screenshot of where it said, and he will go through the permit process there as well. That's all we ever asked both the event organizer, Eric, and the venue owner operator, Jason, to do.
So up there they have a license for alcohol and they have a license for events.
Yes.
Do they have to get a permit every time they're going to have an event?
For 1,000 or more, yes.
Okay,
Temporary mass gathering permit.
So that's the change, is when there's going to be 1,000 or more people.
Yes.
They have to go through a permit. So in lieu of
And
that
was explained to them multiple times.
Okay, is that just a blanket Utah law that just happened? So every time they're going to have a concert, would it behoove them to go through the permitting process?
That or
Just in
change
case.
their zoning, which would require a significant investment on their part for permanent facilities.
Okay,
So yes,
so
or
it's the permanent facilities that changes that.
it's a significant part. Yes, because for example, like the road top, the asphalt motorcycle race at UMC, the same weekend we were having our motocross at DPC, they didn't have to have the permit in the exact same way because those 2 facilities are zoned the same as what he's got the zoning, but they have permanent facilities to address mass gatherings, but there's still, once you breach a certain number, 1,000's like our benchmark, you need to get this health department to sign off, even when there's not a pandemic, guys. And this is the part, again, that the county did a terrible job of not publicly getting out, but they knew it from the conversations we had multiple times with the week's notice that they had given us. So that being said, so the motocross event at Deseret Peak Complex, they reached out as we went orange and said, hey, we would like, and we propose this date. Can we hold this event? And we said, well, there's a couple of conditions. One, whether I get a sense we're not going to agree on the pandemic element, but we said, well, it's going to depend on that. And the second thing is you're going to need to get the health department buy off anyway, because anytime you're going to bring that many people and we don't have the permanent facilities for, like, say, Lantern Fest, right? They want to come out in September. They had to cancel their May event. They bring 16,000 people quite regularly. Well, in the teens anyway, regularly. Well, that's great. But when you have them all concentrated in one place and there's an intermission kind of effect, you're going to have a lot of folks rush all at the same time, right? And you're going to have a bunch of food trucks, and each one of those food trucks needs to have a food handler's permit. And some of them aren't going to be locals. And so our local health department needs to make sure that they're abiding by our community's rules and standards. I mean, there's a process to this that was certainly not anything exceptional, meaning it wasn't an exception for one or the other side. Now, was a week sufficient time? Probably not. And that's what we kept telling them repeatedly. But we won't know until you guys go through the permit process, because by the process, you answer questions on the permit to say whether or not you've conceived how many people. Well, the first news report was 10,000, right? 10,300 booths for businesses. By midweek, it was already being trimmed down to 100 booths for businesses and 4,000 or 5,000. Last night's event in Cedar City, where it was opened with welcome arms, more or less, maxed out at 5,000. By the injunction hearing on Friday, the day before, it was already trimmed down for 3,000 to 5,000. I mean, so the numbers were dropping, but again, repeatedly, we said, anytime you're going to be over 1,000 people, you got to go through this process.
So he could have cut it off at 1,000 people. Say, hey, look, we got the ability to host 1,000 people. After that, we cut it off.
999 if they wanted to be smart and funny about it. Yes. And that question was asked during the injunction hearing. It was also asked bluntly of both the event organizer and the venue owner, are you going to violate the injunction if it's granted? And both punted. You know, for better, listen, this is what I want the message to be. And a meeting with the Mannings and the county since went really well and said, here are some elements that you need to address the way you've been operating all along anyway. For example, the Shed, the Brazen Head Saloon, was originally applied for under the name The Shed, and it is a shed, right? There's nothing debatable about that. If you've been there, you've seen it, which I got the impression, because again, I listened to the podcast on that one.
Been there.
I thought you were there. I've been there, and it's a shed, right? It's not built for occupant. Well, it is not permitted for occupancy, meaning people inside of it, right? But it doesn't mean it's insurmountable. It just means that there needs to be some
when you're up
modifications
during their events, people aren't in there. They go, it's
you go in, you come out.
You go in, you get a drink, you visit, whatever. Some people sign their name to a dollar bill, stick it to the wall, you know, laugh and joke with Jason, and then the gathering happens outside of it in that little partitioned area.
That's not true. Okay, I do my homework, because as of one of the 3 current county commissioners, I'm over economic development and tourism. I absolutely love that part of my job. That being said, I go to the tourism events, you know, and over the years that I've been in the county, I've gone to multiple times. I've been up there during their operating business, and no, there are people standing around inside.
Oh, there'll be people that hang around in there.
But that's occupancy.
Well, it's just like leaning on the bar. But most people are outside when they have when they have
big groups. Yeah, you can't fit.
Or
that
even
many people
you got 2 tables in the whole place.
Anytime they've got a DJ, he's not inside of there.
Sure.
He's sitting across the way. So the main thing is to be outside, and so it's not licensed for occupancy. There's other things that they could do to figure that out, and
we want to help them do just that. Like, I want that message to be crystal clear.
Moving forward, what do they have to do to put in, say, an established restroom? You know, something like that.
Well, they may not need to, but again, it just depends. Do they want to get rid of the additional process for a temporary mass gathering permit? If that's the case, then there will have to be some significant upgrades. If they don't, and listen, again, my business as a government regulator is not to be in their business. My job is to hear from the people. We have laws and ordinances for a reason, and to enforce those. And if there's a situation like this that brings up why they might need to be modified, then there's a process to legally modifying those as well. That's why we had this meeting with them. It became more probably tense when, you know, we're thinking, well, it's after this has come about. But the conversation ironically had started about needing to bring up some of this. You guys need to cross some T's and dot some I's here, even before the Colin Ray situation came about. To their credit, they came in with a great attitude, you know, wanting to be compliant. And I think for staff's part, they came into this with the attitude of how can we help them be successful? How can we guide them? Which is all we're ever going to try to do. Right now, it doesn't mean people love hearing what some of those hurdles are. It doesn't mean that people love regulation. That obviously to the contrary, right? But it was a very productive meeting, and it's going to be a process. I don't expect within a week he's going to spend oodles of money and be able to do that. But I also don't know, not being in his business, if it makes sense for him financially to make some of those permanent, you know, facility upgrades, because monetarily it might just not be there for one or two events that could be $5,000 a year. I don't know. Maybe he plans on and could be very successful at 10 events of 5,000 or more people a year. Depending on what that scenario looks like financially, it might be worth it. But I mean, where he's miles away from corporate limits of Rush Valley Town or Grantsville City, there's not a lot of that permanent infrastructure out there, right? I mean, for any of us that have been to the property, you have to get off pavement to even go up there. For a bike rally, you know, I don't want to lay down my motorcycle on gravel. So I'm not, you know, dissing at all. I mean, motorcyclists who are comfortable with that and a better rider than I am, more power to them to go up there for the bike rally that he has during the Sturgis season. That's just not something, you know, I'm as comfortable with. I don't know. Is paving that mile worth his expense? Would he bring subsequently more people there? I don't know how to answer that for him, but to the extent that that's something he might want to do, I want to help him as much as I want to help Tyson with Another Man's Treasure, Chad with Denny's. I mean, whatever that might be, I want to help these business owners be successful because it adds vibrancy to our economy. It employs local people. I mean, even if we're just selfishly oriented, their success brings in more sales tax revenue and property tax. So I want folks to be successful, and so do the other commissioners.
Now, there's also the political landmines of the zoning laws that we were talking about previously. For example, I once had a legal chocolate business here in Tooele. And
a legal or an illegal?
Well, back then it was legal.
Oh, okay.
As a cottage industry.
Okay.
Now I said, okay, well, I want to put in my 3 stainless steel tubs to wash dishes downstairs and set it up as an industrial kitchen so I can sell out of state. And there was, oh no, you're not zoned for that. Even if, so you can build it all, you can make it up to code, but you're not zoned for that. So it's just like, okay, well, or I want to put alcohol in my chocolate. Well, you got to get yourself an alcohol license to do that. It's like, yet you'll find like these French candy bars with alcohol in the freaking grocery stores or something in Salt Lake. So it's kind of like, you know, as a business owner, it's just, you know, maybe it seems easier just to accept Bitcoin and ignore the system altogether. But there are those elements of stepping over those landmines that you just, and then you find one that you just can't step over. And it's like, oh man, I don't have the thousands and millions of dollars.
And you find that after you've already invested substantial amounts in.
I already know how to make the chocolate bar, right?
Well, you bought the equipment to make it. And
so I just want to put that out there on the plate too. Just,
I mean, it's valid, David.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the story I mentioned at the beginning of the program today. What got me involved, a lot of my neighbors and I were very frustrated with something, right? We felt that particular construction project looked very different and changed the character of our neighborhood. What we realized was there's a process going about changing that, but the process as it was at the moment of application for that builder it's legit. It was frustrating for us, but there's a way to go about changing it. But inherently we perceived, and we're successful, but not because, maybe it was just because we were a pain in the butt to the developer. I really think that that's what it was with a lot of us neighbors, because they could see that, well, this isn't going to be really attractive if this is the kind of feeling prospective buyers might be driving in through the neighborhood to get to this home, and they're going to find a bunch of, you know, folks with these signs. That's probably not going to be to our advantage. But there's a process to going about changing it. We perceived that we should have a reasonable expectation of what our neighborhood should look like. The city didn't necessarily disagree. They just said, well, whatever that might be going forward and what we might learn from this example, they're playing by the rules right now, and that's legal, right? But planning and zoning commissions, which are by state statute volunteers, they can be paid a stipend to reimburse for their vehicle wear and tear to go out and do research, but they're not paid. They're you and I was there for 5 years. Like, I know this well. Their job is to say, what do we want our community to look like? And with a reasonable amount of expectation, if you live in a residential neighborhood, you're expecting it to have a residential feel. And the moment you have 15 non-resident employees showing up every day, there's no way for 15 people to park in a residential, neighborhood on my lot in my driveway. They're going to be up and down. And are they blocking other people's driveways? Are they creating a bunch of noise? Are they getting here at 5 o'clock in the morning and letting their diesel truck idle outside somebody else's bedroom window that still could sleep for a couple of hours? These are the very essence of the questions that planning and zoning commissioners within the cities or the county struggle with all the time. And so, just as an example, if you want to have an in-home daycare, there's going to be the life safety element that you need to apply for with the state to make sure that caring for people's, most precious, children, there's that part, which I'll leave to the state because that really is their purview predominantly. But then there's going to be the element of, well, how many kids am I able by state, numbers to care for as one adult? And then if I want to grow my business, do I want to have non-resident, meaning they don't live in my home, employees come to my house? And what hours of operation? Because if I reasonably expect as a neighbor that it's quiet in my neighborhood at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, but I've got a bunch of people that are predominantly customers of this in-home daycare next door that do shift work, that are slamming car doors and leaving noisy vehicles idling at 2 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock at night, it ruins my reasonable expectation that this is a residential neighborhood, right? So you go through the conditional use process. So a zone might say it's permitted, it's not permitted, black and white, or it's conditional, which is where the variability comes into play. And it says it could be permitted if you meet these conditions. You might be able to have a workshop in your backyard if you have lighting that's downward facing, doesn't blend over and across the fence line to your neighbor, that you're not running a mechanic shop with pneumatic tools that are obviously really loud and noisy, that you've got disposal, facilities for those kind of chemicals. Otherwise, you're expected to go to a commercial zone, right? Because that's what that zoning is there for. So if someone's made the investment beforehand, that's regrettable. Again, guys, 20 years plus a business owner, I get it. I really do. But there's a reasonable expectation that certain things take place in certain zones. And if there's a zone that doesn't fit, we can make new zones.
So let's say an industrial shop is there, just small one man, call it ag industrial, fixing tractors and such. And then houses move up and butt up against him. Where does that, does eventually that just change and he just gets pushed out, or do they try to think ahead and stop the houses coming that way?
Metaphorically, that could be the case. There was a case that was, most of us may have remembered from a few years ago. Stericycle was a business in North Salt Lake, next to the refineries, relatively speaking, that was thinking about coming to Tooele County. That the state even said, hey, you violated some things, the way you're doing things. We'll knock down your penalty if you'll move to Tooele County within a certain amount of years. And the premise was twofold. One, we had signaled a possibility of being willing to accept them as an industrial partner because we have a lot of things outside of residential zones that, our citizens are proud of doing, whether it was handling some of the deadliest things we'd created and stored here to kill other human beings, even if just as a deterrent. We safely did it. We did it with secrecy. We still do those things at certain military installations. And then there are commercial operations where we do some of that stuff as well, right? We handle some really nasty stuff that humans create because we think that the pros of having these elements in our society versus the cons of what, they might produce are worthwhile. Stericycle could have been one of those. But the city of North Salt Lake allowed them to start operating, and thus they did. So you get your gallbladder taken out, You have a bunch of blood samples from your lab. They need to be destroyed. It is commonly believed that it is better to incinerate those than it is to put them in a landfill, for fear that if anything that's bloodborne pathogen, weeps into the groundwater, it'd be really bad. So that's what we do. That's what they do, certainly. But the neighborhood of Foxborough, which was the name of the development, was allowed, a huge oversight, if you ask me, to be built immediately adjacent and shared a property line.
Just rush right up to them and
Yep. But they were there and they were grandfathered in. So they were zoned for it. They were legally conforming. Now the fines they got were because when the power would go out, they would release, in order to not damage the equipment, they would release some exhaust, and that exhaust it had some nasty stuff. And so it's legit to be concerned about it. That being said, that's where they got fined. Ironically, though, and this is how complicated government gets, right? The EPA had these regulations and a process to go through for a big old generator of the size and type that would allow them to be up and running even when the power would go out. They'd have a localized generator on site, but it goes through a process that takes years. And so DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality, managed by the state of Utah, has to oversee that EPA regulation here, and it takes years. And so on the one hand, they're going, hey, we'd really like to not violate this, but this is our solution, get an on-site generator. But because of how exhaustive our system is, it needs to be so big and thus needs that special permit. They couldn't get it without, going through the process. So they're going through the process, but, from time to time, power goes out. And so it did, and they'd have these releases and they got fined. So the other benefit, though, is anytime that you build something with a smokestack in America, you have to build it to then current standards, which would have naturally, if they'd built anywhere in Tooele County, especially where they were thinking about doing it over by MagCorp, you'd have to build it with these kind of safeguards already in place. So thus the reason why possibly accepting it in our community would have been a good thing. As a statewide citizen, the new facility would have been built to the now current standards, not the ones they were grandfathered into 25 years earlier. So yeah, you want to make sure that you zone things properly. North Salt Lake City embarrassingly learned they should have never approved a residential neighborhood right up against that. And I'm sure that the refineries over time are going to have the same quandary, right? They're going to have the same problem.
North Salt Lake's growing.
Yeah. And
it's growing.
That stuff's going to need to go somewhere, because unless we think that magically overnight we're going to get rid of petroleum fuels, like it's still going to be with us for a while, no matter how much we make it more efficient and find other ways to have energy, like we're still going to need it. And so that growth that we're facing, North Salt Lake, Brigham City, Sandy, everybody's experiencing it to some degree in Utah. Yeah. So zoning becomes an issue all the time.
Yeah. How long before we see residences pop up out in Skull Valley?
That will be right there with whether or not Ampitheatre at Studio Ranch feels like it's worth the investment for infrastructure. It's going to be very expensive to get infrastructure around that mountain and over there, and it'll happen eventually. I don't know if it'll happen in our lifetime, but it'll have to.
I dream of living out there quite often. I like it out there.
So you will become their growth problem.
Yep, I will be their issue. But yeah, well, let's see if we got any comments that people want to.
So what's your campaign schedule look like these days? How does that work for you?
That's a loaded question. Well, it's a challenge to be the incumbent. Normally folks think that incumbency is an asset, and maybe under normal conditions it would be, but I'm a workaholic and I really enjoy the job, and I enjoy doing what I do for folks. And not every experience is a win, and not every experience feels great, like the one we brought up with the concert, but I really do love the job. And so I've made myself busy with a number of board and committee assignments, and I love doing that. But having taken on those responsibilities and said yes, it does make it a little complicated when I don't have a lot of free time for campaigning. And yet I need to do it if I'd like to, retain the opportunity to serve Tooele. So there's that. But then the pandemic certainly changes things, right? I walked in today with my mask. I brought my hand sanitizer for when we're done. You'd mentioned that you'd Lysoled all the, equipment here today before I walked in. And by the way, thank you. I appreciate that.
And that's stuff we should do anyway.
I give it a squirt.
Should.
As soon as we walk out of here, I give it all a squirt. And then I sit here every time. So I, of course, mess this up throughout the next. I've got another show I'm recording in here tomorrow. but it's me and my sister on our other show. So,
We keep things as clean as we can around here.
yeah.
Well, so that makes it tough when you ask about the campaign, right? There are a lot of folks that understandably are adhering to what has been preached for the last few months. And they're not, very welcoming to the idea of getting in large groups. And that's probably reasonable. I can understand that there might be some differences, but that being said, that's reasonable, right? So what does campaigning look like? Well, we do the best we can. And honestly, I think that's really symbolic of the job you think you're running for. You can have the best made plans, and every politician does. Every wannabe politician does, right? When you get elected, the job is oftentimes significantly different than what you thought it was going to be. The two guys that I work with right now, they were on city or town council, just like I was on city council before becoming a county commission. There's a misperception that a lot of people think our job is a part-time job, and that's not true. I'm really pleased to report the other commissioners and I, we all put in well more than 40 hours a week. Kendall and I were in the office yesterday. He left for a little bit because he's got he had a family opportunity to go to, and then he came back and he had changed from when he was in the office responding to emails, doing much like I was doing. I mean, it was a Saturday,
Well, and you're here working on a Sunday. You're working right now.
I guess you could take it that way.
And part of it, okay, you're half working. Part of it, you're campaigning, but part of it, you're explaining a lot of. Well,
I'm more towards the explaining what I'm currently doing than the campaigning. I mean, I appreciate that if that's what part of your intention.
We want you to have this format to also do that.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I won't look a gift horse in the mouth. However, it's just, this is the nature of things, right? This format is totally different than 8 years ago when I was running for this job the first time. Facebook Live didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't have live streaming like the Transcript Bulletin does with our commission meetings, or you guys are doing right now. Likewise, podcasts were around, but they just, I don't know, they didn't seem as prevalent as they are today. So I guess if you want to make that comparison, then there's some campaigning there. I would like to think of this as just another way that I'm trying to reach out to citizens to let them know about some of these trickier, subjects. I mean, again, if these were easy and black and white, like we all want them to be, like we all misperceive them to be, then we wouldn't have staff in the numbers that we do, right? We wouldn't have the long drawn out process, whether it's a permit, whether it's rezoning or whatever that is. So anyway, it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
I think that's the ideal way to campaign too, is to come out, and I have a hard time when people just lay promises down, but when they come out and say, this is what's going on and this is where you're, going to get kicked in the ass regardless. I'd rather have that, at least then you know what you're voting for.
Well, the two commissioners that I work with now, and myself included, perceived the job to be of lower hours, perceived the job to be easier, and it was very, rewarding when I, having now been the senior commissioner, both with the current two that I work with and the previous two. It's one of those things that was introspective for me, because I realized, that's what I was like when I came in. And so, there's a significant amount of humility I owe Colleen Johnson, who I'd replaced on the commission, and Bruce and Jerry, even, though I worked with them for the first 2 years in there, because you all come in, like none of us ever think, how can I run for office and be despised by the time I'm done? How can I make every gathering or every time I'm out in public at a restaurant with my spouse or family or a friend, how can I induce controversial decisions I'll make to be constantly interrupted or given a stink eye when I'm out in public? And yet it invariably follows all of us.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
I bet.
You make a third of the people happy, a third of the people really angry, and a third, are indifferent to it or don't know that it's going on at any given time. And I learned very, very painfully and quickly that first year in office, a quote that I will tell you now that I've obviously never forgotten. In politics, friends come and go, but enemies accumulate. And that's true, because at some point you're going to make just about every friend that you had before you got in office, who may have helped you get in office, you're going to disappoint them. And nothing breaks your heart and demoralizes you quicker than seeing people that you respect and like think that you made the wrong call for them. right? And so it's a challenge, but it's been great to work. You know, the current county commissioners, Tom and Kendall, that we work with, we each have different skill sets for sure. And the complementary way that we go about that is how this system works well, when it works well.
Yeah, well, and it is compromise, and we've had Tom in. I'd like to have him come in and just talk history with us one day, because
He's wicked smart, isn't he?
yeah, I enjoy history. Let me ask real quick, what's your college education in?
My bachelor's is in international business, and my master's is in business administration with a marketing emphasis.
Okay, all right.
I regret that I did not go get my law degree.
Yeah. You know how many lawyers are podcasting now?
I have no idea, but I really couldn't care less. It's just, for me, it's one of those goals.
Most of them
wish.
run away from law as soon as they can.
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. I have a lot of friends that are in law, and they all tell me this is the dumbest thing. Don't do it. But
yeah,
you know,
You seem to enjoy that kind of stuff, huh?
I got a penchant for being a bit different, I guess. You know, like I said, I respect the fact that when there's been a split vote and there's a loser out of the three of us, I'm usually that guy, not always. Likewise, you know, stubborn enough that I went to planning and zoning and city council meetings for a year I didn't get paid. There was no compensation or purpose. After my neighborhood got what we wanted, there didn't seem to be any real higher, better use. You know,
you just have a thirst for it.
I don't know. I guess you could just, you know, my wife is a very, very patient lady. Anybody who knows her knows that Mrs. Milne is a saint.
Some people like to go on long, miserable runs in the desert. Some people.
I've done that 2 years ago.
People do.
Even with this body, I did the endurance run across the salt flats 2 years ago.
Oh boy,
sounds like fun.
I was well. You know what? I'm glad I did it though, David.
It sounds
I decided 2 days before I did it.
Let me know when the next one is.
Yeah,
2 days before. So you didn't set out time to plan.
No. Well,
how many toenails did you lose?
I didn't.
Really?
But my ankles were purple. Okay, so 2 years ago, I was, you know, in my latest yo-yo of wanting to get fit, and so I was doing some 5Ks, and I was, you know, running on the weekends or during the day, you know, early in the morning before I'd go to work. But I was just trying to get in better shape, and I got to admit, like, ever since my youth, I get that runner's high. That euphoria is totally legit for me and just boosts my attitude. I'm sure there's some people listening now that are like, he should run more then. But that being said, that's what I was doing. And I thought about it, Jared, but I was like, that's pretty long, because the Salt Flats Endurance Run is a 50K, a 50 miler, or a 100 miler. And I was like, well, I'm not shooting for the longer ones. I'll just go for that shorter one. I'd only ever done 2 half marathons, one for fun, all on my own. Just went from my house through the community out to the jail, back through the community, back home. And that ended up being over 13-1. And another time was legit for like a Boy Scout fundraiser on the east side of town. But that was it. And I don't know. I like to push myself. I'm an adrenaline junkie. I love jumping out of perfectly good airplanes. You know, I love things that make my heart rate
you have
go
a bee
up.
collection too.
Yeah. So funny thing about that, I was allergic to them when I started. And
so
Mrs.
you're doing
Milne
some
said,
beekeeping?
and I quote, yeah, I love
Good.
beekeeping. She just looked at me and said, "This is stupid," and then walked away.
I got
She's
a buddy
a very
out
patient
of,
lady.
I got a buddy out at work that's a bee farmer, and it has changed his life. It's honestly, he's a different person.
How so? I mean, I'm no longer allergic, by the way. I don't have to take anything for it, and
Yeah,
you know, it swells up a little bit,
calm.
but not life endangering anymore.
He's calm. He's relaxed. Honestly, it's like he fell in love.
For me, it is then like in the moment of doing it. I guarantee you can find some folks that are close to me who'll say, I don't think he's any calmer. But I've been doing it just about 9 years now at the end of this season. And I will tell you that I ignore my phone, which is rare for me because I'm one of those folks that's pretty connected to it and addicted, you might even say. But I learned early on, because what I like to do is dare myself. If the bees are calm, I won't wear my bee suit because I'm just that dumb and stubborn. Again, like there's a common thread here, and I totally own it. And before my phone will vibrate, before it will ring, I can hear the hum change. Whatever that wavelength is, they can sense it somehow.
So
you can hear your bees after you've been doing it a while. You open it up, you can smell the health. Which Kelly Keel is the bee inspector. Every county has to have a bee inspector by contract or by law, and we have one by contract with Kelly Keel. And he's a great guy, and it's just a family thing that they've done. And he can tell you the health of the hive the moment he opens it. He's just a character in and of himself. If you ever want to get into the geekier stuff of beekeeping. And so over the years, I've learned this, but nowhere near like him. And you can hear how happy or not they are. Like you can tell if they're angry and they're going to come tap at you. If you're in a bee suit, they'll oftentimes like, tap on that as they're trying to come towards you. But it's very Zen-like in the moment of working them, especially if I'm dumb enough to go in there without my suit, which I've done successfully many times and dozens and dozens of times and not get stung. But you have to move slowly because they're attracted to the quick movement. You have to be calm. You have to, breathe a certain way, because if they smell the mammalian breath, boom, that's right where they're headed, and they'll come sting you. I've been stung right between my nostrils. I've been stung on the carotid artery, and
right like between the nostrils.
Oh, it hurt.
Oh,
mad.
Mother! I'd be on my knees out there down.
I quickly put down the frame. I quickly, did what I needed to do. The irony is that time I was wearing my bee suit, but she got in. Somehow I must not have zipped it or Velcroed over the zipper just right. And, there's all this buzzing around. So you can't really easily distinguish, the beating of their wings. You're feeling that through the screen. You're feeling, them there. But there was just something about this one that I'm like, oh crud, I think she's inside my mask and my veil. And sure enough, as I was going to put down the frame and put it back in the box, boom, she stung me. I'm like, ah.
And you've got to eat that sting while you still put the frame in.
Yes, because you don't want to kill the bees. You don't know where the queen is, or, in my case, I didn't know where she was because they're very fragile. And
are you breeding any queens or doing anything like that?
No, that's one thing I haven't done yet. I've split a lot of hives over the years, but I have not bred my own queens. I typically either get them from Kelly Keel or Cal Ranch or Tractor Supply or the Lunds and Erda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my buddy, he's breeding and trying to crossbreed and make hybrids and all that stuff. And
no murder hornets, I hope.
Dude, don't jinx me. 2020 has not been a good year.
No, have you seen what the bees do to the murder hornets?
Cook them.
They cook them. Bees have an intrinsic heat. Murder hornets can't stand that, so the bees just kind of swarm it. They don't sting. Well, they might, but
they try. But they've got that armor.
Yeah, but they just surround it and build a cocoon, and it kills. And then the hornet's just laying there baked.
Well, I've seen what the murder hornets can do to the bees, though. I've seen one of those videos.
It can't do it. Well, maybe, I don't know.
One-on-one, they just eat right through them.
But
power in numbers. Society can be a great thing.
But
but you do sacrifice for your role.
I think he was looking at trying to breed that Africanized bee. Breeding.
Where's he located?
He's in Grantsville.
I hope he doesn't release.
Well, no,
he's here.
No, a crossbreed. He's not bringing African bees, but he's trying to crossbreed them. So I can't remember. I might be jumbling in my head, but
they did notice that the colony collapse disorder does not affect the Africanized bees the same way it does the European honeybees.
Maybe there's something about the honey's production's stronger, the yield's better, or something. And then he's got a really, I think he was telling me he's going to yell at me when I go back into work. He's, no, I was doing this, and I'm just making shit up as I go along, but he loves it, and it's changed him personally inside. He's just more relaxed, more calm, and more you can communicate with him better. It's made a big difference in him. It just seems like he found his happy place, and he's running, I don't know, 40 hives or something now.
Well, he's got a good operation then.
Yes,
I'm at like 14, 15 right now.
Yeah.
And that's in 3 years, and he's got hives he's building up, and
that's great.
He's diving in headstrong. He wants to be a bee farmer.
Well, it's a lot of work and it's messy. Mrs. Milne does not love my little hobby and how it can make things a mess in our house. But in order to get that honey out, it's some work. I mean, I've got my hives out in Vernon and Rush Valley and Erda. So I was having a very interesting conversation with some folks not too long ago about, Erda as it develops takes away some of that opportunity. They're professionals. That's what they do. But for me, it's purely a hobby. And I get the irony of that. But
do you notice like any difference around your house, the flora, the flowering?
Originally, that's why I got it. It was a little bit of that, and the fact that I was pushing back against Mrs. Milne wouldn't let me have some chickens.
So you went bees.
Yeah, that's why she looked at me and said, "This is stupid. You're
Does she
allergic
let
to
you
them."
have chickens now?
No,
No, still no chickens.
no. She still rules the roost.
Huh?
But originally, the idea was partly I wanted a better yield from my own garden, and that has been mostly true. But they don't do well in suburbia. There's just not enough forage for them in suburbia, and people use pesticides and all sorts of chemicals, and it affects the hives. I can smell, like a couple of days after, I can smell that chemical in the air of a neighbor with dandelion killer, or something like that. They don't do well for a few weeks thereafter. They always seem to have some stunted growth and a lot of dead bees around the entrance. So there's just not enough food anyway under normal circumstances. So, I got to put them out in some of our agricultural areas. So, but I've really enjoyed the hobby. It's fun. It's messy, but it's fun.
It's big business. People rent their bees out across the nation.
Yeah, they do. And we have a lot of them here in Tooele County that do that. It's just not something I've done yet.
Yeah. There's guys that rent
one
bees to Texas, to California.
Yeah.
They send them out there. They'll winter them in California because they just stay alive better. It's easier to keep them alive. And then summertime, they'll send them to another farm somewhere else. Guys driving around the country dropping bees off.
It's big money. Let me ask one last closing question here.
Yeah, and if there's any questions from your viewers.
Yeah, I'll root through that while he.
So I think I've known you since the beginning of your political career, correct?
I remember the first time I met you, and I remember the first county commission meeting that you came to with some pretty crazy ideas. Yes.
Fantastic ideas. And they were fantastic ideas. So
not legal, but okay, they're ideas. Anyway, we
can dive into that one later. But you've been doing this for a while.
Yeah.
You seem to be good at it. You seem to enjoy it. You seem to get something back from it. What about the future, Shawn Milne? Is there a future doing something more than just county commissioner? I mean, in your heart, do you see yourself going somewhere else?
I don't know.
Ahead? Or
I was really done with politics on the city council level. My last year was pretty rough, particularly a coworker and I didn't appreciate that my ideas may not be part of the majority, but I didn't appreciate the way I was spoken to, and I'd let a couple of other friends know that I'm like, I'm going to finish this term. I'm going to be done. And then there was an idea of, a couple of friends that were thinking about running for this very office. And I actually thought, oh, there goes our friendship. Because if these two decide to run and they end up being, against each other, because that wasn't in my mind at all. So I say that to then acknowledge that I'm obviously here. I don't know. I mean, I feel blessed to have had this opportunity, and I've certainly, on a personal level, I've appreciated the growth of, I will be forever, I think, a much better citizen. And I know that I used to rail on Facebook about national topics as though anybody who I was speaking about would care to be listening to some middle-aged guy in the middle of nowhere, Utah. But after getting in this job for a while, and I got off Facebook for like 9 months, I realized that there aren't enough people who thank other people for the public sector work that they do. I got a dear friend, Diane, sent a letter out of the blue this week, and it came in the mail and was incredibly nice. You don't get the thanks very often for what you do, but you hear about all the complaints, right? Like that's what you are. As an elected official, you're the official complaint department. And sometimes that can be a little bit rough. And sometimes for my own mental health, I think, there'd be a time to move on. I am inherently one of those folks that believes that there's time that you should move on so that somebody else can become a better citizen by learning what the experience is. At the same time, I've come to respect that when you've got the skill set that you've built up from some failures. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've learned a lot from some of my failures and not just the successes. You want to continue to put that to good use, right? I mean, you want to make sure that, well, then now that I've got that experience, let's not fail again. And I'll tell you, that's one of the reasons why I'm running. When I came into office, the county was broke and we had to lay off fully a quarter of our workforce, and got some pretty steep criticism fairly early for building up a rainy day fund. And I'll tell you what, right now, given this current state of things, I'm really proud of having a rainy day fund that I can look you guys in the eyes or anybody else and say, we don't need to have a tax increase because our budgets went down because of this. We don't need that. Now, if you want, nice things, other things, whatever, that's a different argument. But we've got a savings account now that I'm proud of that doesn't need to lay a bunch of people off or cut back services that you expect from government. And I'm proud of that. That's one of those things learned the hard way. I mean, it took some arrows to do that, and it took a lot of time and discipline over years to get it to where we're at a safe cushion like we are now. But back to your question about what does the future hold? I don't know. And honestly, it is a really odd feeling for the first time in my life. I don't know. I teased about the law school thing. I've thought about going to law school.
Yeah.
At my age, that seems like a really dumb financial move because it's not like I would
I
likely
think
pay
the
cash
big
up front
question
for it,
is
but
what would the missus say?
she is supportive because she really is a saint.
Okay.
I mean, I've said to her over the years, in that karmatic sort of way, the Eastern religions and Taoist, Buddhist kind of philosophies believe that we are in this life a direct relation to what we were in a previous life, right? So jokingly, I've always said to her, I don't know what I did in my previous life, but I obviously did something well to be with her. And I'm like, but you really screwed up to be with me. So she's supportive if that's it. I mean, I love economic development and tourism at my core. I love capitalism. I think that, you said something probably 20 minutes plus ago about, we have nice things because the private market, more often than government, but government has produced some things that the private market did not produce first, where we have these nice things because, private market allowing people to take the risk. It also means they have the responsibility of living with that risk if it doesn't go well. So I love trying to help other people figure out how they can be successful with something they're passionate about.
I know I've heard Chris talk about that with you. You've been helpful with him, Chris Fields.
Oh yeah. Chris is a good dude. Gosh, that guy's got a lot of stories.
He's I've known Chris all my life. Grew up with him.
Yeah, he's a good dude. I've told him he's the most successful polygamist that he isn't really. I mean,
on
has
that
a lot of
note,
kids by a lot of ladies.
On
there,
that
but he's
note,
a great dad.
I've often thought we could get us on the map by the Guinness Book of World Records if I could just get Chris's ear. The record is 27 marriages in 1 year.
Oh yeah, I'm not going to touch this subject.
I think Chris,
I was just trying to be
step
funny
up to the
ago.
plate.
Poor Chris.
Anyways, not to berate Chris. I really like Chris.
No, he's a good dude.
decent
He's
guy.
a good dude. But
he's an entrepreneur at his core.
he is, and he's obviously shown that he can be successful at it.
And he's got a good business sense. And if he sees something that he enjoys, he's the best type of entrepreneur. Is he sees something that he enjoys, and he figures out how to make that a business and try to make it grow.
Yep. So, David, I mean, helping entrepreneurs, helping somebody who's not an entrepreneur, who maybe is the third generation owner of a business, something like that. I really just don't know. I've loved public policy, though. I've got to admit, like, there are a lot of challenges, and I've seen some industries that don't know well how to speak to government entities. It'd be nice to maybe help them, like through maybe a regulatory process. I can see myself going back into the private sector in certain ways. So I really don't know. But I know, depending on how this re-election effort of mine goes, I'll either continue to have this at the forefront of my time and attention, being involved here at the county, and still need to find, something because it's going to convert to a part-time job by district. Or I will suddenly find myself unencumbered with a lot of board and committee assignments that are directly tied to the position that I have now. For example, I'm currently the chair of the statewide association of county commissions, councils, and administrators. It's been interesting to find out from my peers how differently they do it in their jurisdiction. And it's been equally surprising to see how some of us do things the exact same way, no matter where we're at. It's been interesting to sit on a couple of national boards that I do to see how different things are state by state. For example, in some states in the Midwest, it is not uncommon that if you don't pay your property tax in year one, somebody else can pay it for you, and you now have a lien from somebody else having paid your property tax, and they can charge so much interest. If you don't catch up within 2 or 3 years, they own your whole property. We do not have that. We have it where if you don't pay your property taxes for 5 consecutive years and don't have a payment plan to get caught up, then we, the government entity will own your property, which is something I take very, very seriously because I don't want to see anybody with 22 years of equity or 35 years of equity. They don't owe a mortgage anymore. They're on a fixed income, retired, and they can't afford property taxes. I take that seriously. So, I think that there's a lot that I've learned I'd like to still keep putting to use for the benefit of people. And if it's in the private or public sector, I don't yet know.
Well, we've got from the listeners, we've got kind of two questions, comments that come up. One, it was about the Brazen Head, just talking about how they support that. And that was from Dave's darling wife. So we're definitely going to field that, or we could just ignore it and Dave can go home and get beat up by his wife. Either way, I'm okay with either way.
What does my wife say? What is
she just saying? Talked about how she liked it up there.
Okay.
Let's support it. Let's keep it growing.
It is a nice establishment. I think what he did is amazing. And it's the first time I've even ever heard of it is when I took you guys up there to interview. It's interesting. I think it's kind of very cultural for this area.
I like it. I like the I don't know, rebellious feel of it. But another one talked about the worry of turning Tooele Valley into Salt Lake Valley on growth. And I understand that, but I do think growth still has to happen. And
well, it will, as long as we all have children and grandchildren, right?
That's the thing.
It will.
There's no way around it.
We can either build upward and preserve some open space in between, or we can continue the same sprawl that the world over has seen.
And we can't get our federal lands either. So
yeah, that's an argument that actually came up. I was interviewing a gubernatorial candidate. You gentlemen may know that every week since the crisis started with the pandemic, I've held an economic recovery task force meeting. The first few weeks, it was 3 times a week, and it's been dialed back to once a week, and we have that on Wednesday afternoons. Last couple of weeks, I've had gubernatorial candidates on because one of these folks is going to be our next governor. And I wanted to hear what their economic development ideas for the state of Utah would be. And specifically, as we narrow that focus through the program, how does Tooele County fit into that, right? And so I've had this call and, looking for feedback. And one of the things that keeps coming up is this idea of growth and pro or con and, somewhere in between. But I haven't found too many people that are kind of indifferent and in between, other than they might just say, well, growth is going to happen and it's too complex for me. It's not my world. So I'm just going to keep going to work every day and do what I can. And hopefully you'll not, continue with the congestion or improve, lanes so that there's less congestion, whatever. But folks are fairly opinionated about this for good reason, because we rightfully or wrongly perceive growth affects our quality of life, right? You mentioned earlier you wanted an acre or half an acre and would like it. And I'm going to presume, knowing you for a few years, that it's because you'd like a little bit more of the homesteading approach. You'd like a little bit more room between you and your neighbor, whatever that might be. And all of that's very valid. But if you look at the globe, anytime that a culture is successful and they grow population-wise, they take up their arable land through urban sprawl. It might be slower in some places, it might be fast, but they always take up their best agricultural land along the river valley, along a delta, wherever the convergence of water and agricultural, food opportunities happen. We are not the wisest species we love to hold ourselves out to be. I mean, I'm not going to say I want to ruin the salt flats, but ideally, if you wanted to build on top of it and pave it over like that retro song of yesteryear, tear it down and put on a parking lot, like you'd want to do it out there where it's not really yielding a higher net benefit to society, right? And yet Tooele Valley will likely develop, generally speaking, much like the rest of the Wasatch Front, unless we fundamentally do something different, not minor something different. Because if we build this out and say just 5 and 20 acre parcels, okay, because that's a lot of pressure the county commission seems to get and has for a few years, all that's going to do is the per household needing to tie up 5 or 20 acres, that's going to be great for the individual. But for our culture, it's going to make the growth in Skull Valley and Rush Valley happen sooner.
Yeah, well,
because we're not growing more land.
Yeah, it's going to be farmers or people who intrinsically have a lot of wealth moving in. It won't be single families. It'll dry up a lot of the school support. It'll do a lot of rough things if we break it down like that.
So we
Oh,
So we end up having a situation where we have to look at how we house differently, because we will be victim to our own whims like everyone else has. And we can continue that suburban sprawl that we've seen go north and south because of the valley behavior along the I-15 corridor, or we can choose to do something truly unique in Tooele Valley and say, we're going to incentivize clustering. So I'm going to use this opportunity that this isn't a campaign for my reelection. This is a campaign for us to think differently. I've been proposing for the last few years that what if this piece of paper represented a 100-acre parcel? And traditional suburban sprawl would just divide this almost evenly with some roads in between, and we would have sprawl. And they would all look very similar. There might be some different home models, but it would look like your typical neighborhood. Well, or we could cluster into one corner of it, and we would build more tightly there, but we could preserve the open space. Now, you might ask yourself, well, what's the developer's incentive? The culture's incentive is this: fewer lane miles of roads to maintain after they're built out and done, water and sewer and everything else to pay for, and maybe a more walkable community, maybe genuinely a more walkable community. But the developer still has all this open land. Where's their incentive to do that? Because they're like, well, gosh, why don't I just build that kind of density everywhere? And we have been saying, no, we're not keen on that, right? Even back to that Temple scenario. Well, what if we allowed, because the general plan were to say 1-acre parcels or 5-acre parcels or whatever it is, that's the zoning currently on this land and surrounding this 100-acre parcel. And we say, but what if we allow you the density of 5-acre lots, which would be 20, homes, right? What if we said, well, if you're going to have 5-acre lots, you could have 20 of those for the 100 acres, or we could allow you to have 20 parcels or 25 parcels. Maybe we incentivize them with a little slightly greater density and say, build over here in this corner. And for that privilege, because the master plan does, after all, say it's zoned for RR5, rural residential 5-acre lots. For that privilege, you must tie up and encumber this for the next 25 or 50 years. And it gives your community 25 or 50 years to absorb the growth before that comes back on the market. Cannot come to the local governing authority any earlier than whatever that number might be, and you've incentivized them to cluster. And what if we chose this corner because it's closest to the way in and out of the valley for commuters? And it keeps this pristine thing. Because what I've heard a lot of folks say over the years is, I moved here, okay, which is immediately kind of an irony flag. I moved here for that pastoral scene. I moved here for that bucolic lifestyle of the countryside. Well, if I allow that to develop as it's currently zoned, you're going to lose that anyway.
so
You don't own on the other side of the fence. Somebody with a 5-acre parcel is going to grow trees. They're going to have some outbuildings, and you won't have that pastoral scene anyway. And if it's 20 households on the whole 100 acres, I'm going to get 20 households of traffic anyway. Or do I cluster it where some of the traffic trips, maybe it's walkable, maybe it's not. They don't have to get in their car that often, but it's just a what if.
yeah, it's a funny statement. I moved out here for that, and then I want to close the door behind me.
A lot of people never say it that bluntly, but that's kind of what they mean.
That's just be honest. That's what it is. Like
and it's a challenge, right? Like, that's a human condition. That's not
it is
Joe, Bob, or Susie Q. Like, that's just a human condition that now that I have what I perceive to be mine, which is the view as well. Well, we don't have private property rights for the view. That's not how that works.
Yeah, it would have been nice. I when I first got this place, I just looked across at the mountain while I drank coffee in the morning, and then they put houses in the way.
I mean, if you wanted that view so bad, you would have bought it, right?
I would have kept bumping houses back.
Yeah.
But it's fine. It is what it is. There's no way to avoid growth. No way. We just can't. Well, I mean, I guess if the coronavirus is real, it'll make that decision for us. But
I know you're being funny, but let's go back to the Spanish flu. That decimated population, right?
it did.
100 years later, look where we're at. I mean, it's only temporary. When we look at the lost civilizations, they were clearly humongous to have done some of those great pieces of architecture that they did. And then we found them, right? Because it was lost. So they've been decimated before, and we bounce back with bigger numbers and seemingly quicker, right? And obviously modern medicine is doing a lot more to make us live longer. Like, we have to cope with growth, but we cannot go about it the same way we've always done it, or we're going to get the same results. And suburban sprawl had, we've seen traffic times lead to greater coronary heart disease, because it's been proven with study after study that longer commute times leads to that sort of stress, right?
Can't imagine.
You're missing little Susie's dance recital or her soccer match, or little Bobby's, activity after school. You're missing time with your spouse, or just, heaven forbid, you want to watch more funny YouTube videos of cats and not be driving instead and frustrated like that movie Office Space.
Not
right?
stare at the back of a Kia for an hour to go.
It's
20
coming.
miles.
You're going to have autonomous cars very shortly. I can guarantee you our future is going to be an autonomous.
Well, if Deseret
autonomous
UAS does as it's hoping to do, that's hopefully what would happen. Yes.
Yeah.
And other programs like Deseret UAS.
Yeah, we'll get autonomous cars. I doubt that'll change, that when that autonomous car is creeping from light to light with another autonomous car in front of it, you're not going to be stressed. I mean, when the car was invented, it was supposed to take away the stress of, dealing with the horse and feeding it nonstop. And that was a big argument when the car came out. New York City, they had a union that was horse shit shovelers, 107. And that was a big argument, them coming out saying we got to stop these cars.
Gee, I never thought of horse shit shoveling unions, but yeah, interesting.
Just
I can see how fun your program must be, gentlemen.
Here we go.
But that was a big argument, that was a big argument then. And then the next big argument was, what do we fuel them with? Well, what's easiest? That's why we went with gasoline. It's the easiest.
Any other questions from your viewers?
No, that's it. That's it. Well, hold on. Someone said, all right. So Callie, she said, this is about the zoning, but who is to say they wouldn't come back in and change the zoning and build on the area once preserved? That's talking about when you do the clustering.
Sure. Well, I guess culturally that's what we expect, right? Like if that's what the law is, then it would be as grandfathered in as other things. See, that's the thing though. Zoning can change. She's got a good question there. And I appreciate the spirit in which it was asked, because that's not wrong. I mean, we have a general plan, but it's not the county. The county doesn't just invent it, or a city just invent it. We do it through a public process. It's spelled out in state statute how zoning as it currently is can change. So you have a general plan, and a general plan is most of the time, most of it is going to be the same as what it currently is. But a general plan is the whole document it's supposed to be, to show how it could be different. So you have zoning, say, in all of Tooele Valley. You've got Grantsville and Tooele City who are going to be in charge of their own zoning, and they have to have, by state statute, their own general plan as well. The county has to have ours. Just a few years ago now, we updated our general plan. It is a public process. It is the public weighing in on what the public is willing to contend with on the negative side and wants on the positive side. And so we have a lot of area in this most contended area of Erda between Grantsville, Tooele City, and Stansbury Park, where zoning is what it currently is, and a general plan process that worked with public input meetings. Public scoping was sought and given. And it means that the developer gets to weigh in, the citizens get to weigh in that live right next to it, the citizens that live in other parts of the county can weigh in that don't live next to it. It is a public process that says, what could we envision it being? It may be this right now. It may be zoned RR5, rural residential, 5-acre minimum. But we could see it being mixed use. We could see it being an NC, a neighborhood commercial, or something like that. We could perceive it being like that because we see that the growth is coming. What do we want? And through that public process, government moves slowly, because again, at the early of today's program, I suggested an alternative definition of politics is compromise, collaboration, right? And so we have this process that is slow moving that says, public, give your input. Developers, landowners, because developers and landowners are not necessarily the same either. Give your input. What do you think it could be? And so then a general plan is adopted. and a general plan is adopted by a local legislative authority that says, well, for the time being, you all have asked us to be that body of people, and you've gone through this process, and we're going to say, okay. So what's challenging, and I've mentioned it in many a public meeting, some of the RR5 is what it is, but the public process of what it could be, the general plan update, suggested anywhere from 2 to 8 units per acre. 2 would be a half-acre parcel. 8, I mean, you know, you can do the math, and real quickly you see, oh, but they're identifying that they could deal with a lot smaller than 5 acres for a lot. And so she's not wrong. She asks a really great question. But if we as a culture say, hey, you know what, we think that this is a really important way to preserve some open space and to slow or manage the growth, and it's a possibility, and we, you know, if we think it's a good one, and we cluster or we incentivize to build higher homes, but to slow it down and to preserve this as open space, then we could do that. What we want to do, we can do. It's just, it takes all of us working together to do it.
And that'd be a kind of will of the people 10 years, 20 years down the road if they want to
change it all of a
maintain
sudden.
it or change it. Yeah.
Or it could become one of the quality of life elements that we say, this is how we are not like Salt Lake Valley. This is what we have. We have some open space, but we have 10-story buildings, not along the tracks line, like is being redeveloped, right? They've taken, since mass transit has come in and shown that it can be successful, they're seeing this redevelopment along certain places where there's the track stops, and they're building upwards because they're already boxed in by sprawl, right? So they buy these really expensive pieces of real estate, and then they build upward in order to make the per unit household cost of that building more affordable. You know, they got to do that math for themselves. Maybe we say it's not so much the tracks line, it's the open space. And now, yeah, you're going to probably pay a lot more to be on the 10th floor than the 2nd floor because your view is going to be that much more spectacular. But as a result, you're going to have open space that could be probably a mix of parks, probably a mix of alfalfa fields, or whatever that might be.
Oh, alfalfa field's the way to go.
But whatever our community wants. If we want suburban sprawl, we will continue to do things the way it's always been done. And it doesn't matter if that's 5 acres or 1/5 of an acre. We can have urban sprawl in 1/5 of an acre too. Mm-hmm. It is not, I'm not trying to make the argument that it's only large lot sizes that do that, but you know, we just have to figure out what's important to us.
Is there any thoughts of bringing mass transit out here?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've been an advocate for years on this. Thankfully, the commission as a whole, generally speaking, with Wade and Myron and I, and Tom and Kendall and I, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of vehicles that commute every day that have 3 empty seats. 3 empty seats, and then space in between my front bumper and the next one's back bumper is wasted space, because that lane mile of road costs the same, generally speaking, whether I'm going to have 1,000 people commute across it in an hour or 100, right? But if I can fit more people and it can move more quickly and efficiently with 10,000 people per hour, then that would make more sense, right?
So we're looking at more buses, maybe bringing
more than likely it'll be buses for the foreseeable future, because just like Costco and Olive Garden won't be coming in anytime soon because we don't have enough residential households, we as statewide citizens, and because we're in the UTA service area, we subsidize that program, that government spending. We also want them to be efficient with their build out, right? So it's really expensive to build rail. And while it's more efficient and it's faster and it has its own dedicated lane, so to speak, that would be ideal, but it's really expensive. So as statewide citizens, we can understand why to get from the international center, which is immediately, you know, west of the airport, or somewhere along Magna, there's a whole lot of empty space where they wouldn't be having a whole lot of stops, which would be great because on the one hand, that means you could move faster through that area. But every lane mile, it goes back to that water scenario, water and sewer line scenario from like an hour ago. It's going to be really expensive. So in the meantime, we're probably better off with amping up our bus service. And prior to the pandemic, gentlemen, I got to tell you, we're really proud. The Tooele County Commission, we're one of the highest rates of carpooling in the entire state. Nice. And the reason is the van pool is more popular than the buses, and they're more nimble, right? But we have one of the highest rates in the entire state because predominantly, like Dugway does a great job of incentivizing van pool as well.
South
so does
area
Energy
did
Solutions.
as well.
So, there's some major employers that buy into it and have that philosophy, but to the extent that we can encourage more folks to do that, then we have more service. And if we have more service, then it's quicker and fewer stops, and it incentivizes the next person who's kind of on the fence to say, well, but I really want that extra 15 minutes to sleep in, but otherwise, again, like, we get what we pay for, and we're willing to pay the incredible high cost of motor fuel that includes transportation taxes built into it, that cost of independently being able to commute, which means I can't be more productive on my phone or my iPad or my laptop while I'm driving. But if you're on a bus, you now can use that time because somebody else is taking care of the driving. You're going just as slowly as if you're in your personal vehicle. But with, advent of today's technology and headphones, you can even listen to your own music. Yesteryear, you wouldn't be able to do that with a Walkman. And so, in some of the big metro areas, they had boom boxes, and it became a law that, couldn't play your boom box on the bus. And I mean, I know that's a long time ago, but like, we really have a lot of personal creature comforts to get on mass transit today. And so there's a lot of benefit. Now, having said that, it's going to take a lot of us to do it to make a real meaningful difference. And then we'll have to have a lot of successful bus trips, and then they'll probably put in the density, that brings in some rail, and it'll be slow and progressive.
I do like those van pools, and I know that the different installations around here sponsored those van pools and assisted in covering the cost, because they aren't cheap. They're not cheap to get involved in and any of that. If you've got a, say out where I work at Cargill, we looked at getting one, and it was a bridge too far for everyone to cough up the, I can't remember what it was. It was like $3,000 per head of us 8 guys that were going to do it. That was just too steep to,
as each individual, and then you got to defray the costs with passengers or
something like that. I can't remember. This was years ago.
Okay.
We were trying to get we ran the numbers to try to get our company to do it. This was in 2007, and then 2008 happened, and no more talks. It all dried up there. But I do a carpool with guys I work with, but those van pools, I like the idea. Keep them going.
Well, our buses are amazing. I've traveled on buses all over the world, and I can tell you some of the most comfortable bus rides I've had is straight to the airport from Tooele. You got internet.
A little bit different than Latin America or some other places, right?
Well, I mean,
there's no chickens flying around.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't you like riding a bus with the livestock?
Oh, that, or you're pretty sure the brakes.
Yeah.
They may not even have any. They slow down by how quickly they go around a corner.
They shift down.
Yeah.
Callie wanted to thank you for clarifying how it works.
Oh, no problem, Callie. Thanks for the great question.
Yeah. Thanks for coming in. I would like to have you in another time to talk about the inland port.
You bet.
A deep dive on that. That interests me. I know there's a lot of people with an opinion on it. I don't have an opinion. I just think it's interesting, both sides of it.
There's definitely some pros and cons. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to invalidate cons, but I believe, like I've said throughout today's program, that you can compromise on some of those cons and get more pros. But there's definitely validity to some of the cons. But I think I just happen to believe that there might be more pros than cons. But I'm not going to negate that there are cons.
Well,
no matter what you do.
I watched an interview you did about it, and you talked about arguing to spread more of the inland port out west, bring more of it into Tooele County, and build industrial in those unused areas around Dell and Aragonite. And I like that idea.
Yeah, I sense, and I want to respect that you said that we could talk about it at a future date, but I will take your bait and say this: the state has stated it's going to come no matter what.
Yeah.
The State Inland Port Authority and the hiring they've done this last year, it's going to come. So statewide citizens, we're going to have an inland port no matter what. The reality then, or the discussion becomes, what will that reality look like? We can either have 100% of the job opportunities right over the county line and have to commute through that extra traffic anyway, or we can get some of it for an economic base that is a property tax base, sales tax base, employment base, reverse the flow of at least some of it. Now, again, even Salt Lake City has had their challenges on trying to address this hot topic, but we're going to have the same. But just like an airport or a seaport that brings commerce and can be a real opportunity for, commerce in your jurisdiction. I would rather have some of it and have an influence over some of it than get 100% of it just a few miles over the county line and then get all the negative benefits of, again, going back to an hour ago, right? Residential households pay the same rate as a business on only 55% of our value. Well, if we're going to be the bedroom community for the workers that live there, and why wouldn't we be? We're going to be pretty proximate to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't I want some of that commercial tax base as well? But it definitely has some potential negatives and some that are probably foregone conclusion negatives, like extra traffic. So I'm not going to negate that, and I'm not going to devalue those criticisms. They're legit, but
I like your idea. Let's throw some honey, Mr. Beekeeper, out there where nothing's being used, where I-80 is more commonly empty than it's not out there on the west side around the point of the mountain. Let's throw some honey out there and bring some revenue in and lessen up the traffic going that way. Maybe make it more complicated going that way, but
yeah, we'll see.
I like the
overall, it could be an environmental benefit, because if we're reducing the amount of tractor trailers on the road, you're going to save lives from accidents.
Yep.
Well,
you're going to reduce emissions.
Yep.
And we're going to increase our train traffic instead of our tractor trailer traffic. And I think that has a lot of benefit from my perspective as someone who drives on these roads. And I think they're freaking dangerous, to be honest with you.
Well, it's an excellent point that folks that are talking about the environmental impact. So little known element is I was co-chair of the satellite port working group, which is a subcategory of the Inland Port Board. For this very reason, was to see, is there potential for breaking up one huge master planned west side of Salt Lake City port, as was originally envisioned and sold, to possibly breaking it up throughout the state of Utah and minimize, if you're going to have trucks come from the Uinta Basin with natural gas and oil anyway, and coal from Carbon and Emery County anyway, and agricultural products and steel from Box Elder anyway, why wouldn't you have a smaller campus there and get those trucks off the road and just have an interconnected rail network? Well, part of Tooele County's play could be very similar to that. And in addition, borders and custom control patrol, because you've still got to inspect those connexes when they get taken off of a ship and they touch down in, either SeaTac in Seattle, or whatever autonomous zone it'll become, or Long Beach, and you've still got to inspect it. Well, the idea is, whether it's going to be one major installation west of Salt Lake City or some other part in a satellite working group scenario, you're still going to need to have those inspections, right? But the environmentalists would have you say, well, what about pollution? Well, okay, we can do some things about that, right? You can have electric pups. The pups are the small, engines that move them around the train yard, as opposed to like a full-scale locomotive that, goes across country. You can have electric pups and you can help solve some of that, right? Likewise, you can require that there be, tier 3 fuel semis are the only ones allowed in the yard to come pick up and do the transfers and stuff like that, or maybe even electric or hydrogen fuel powered semis, whatever the case may be. Like, those are some of the things we can work through the process and through the dialogue. But with our growing population, we're consuming those products anyway. And even if we're not, and they're on their way from Long Beach to Denver, they're coming through our state anyway. But if you can get them on a rail, so then you and I as consumer passenger vehicles, riders or drivers, then I'm not competing with those semi trucks. Then it's not the danger and it's not that additional exhaust. If you can get the momentum of a train going with 100 cars and most of those cars are double decked, then you're taking how many semis off? Right now, through the middle of our valley, we have 19 daily average, 19 trains that come through with about an average of 100 train cars that are in tow. Well, you figure if those are doubles, how many equivalent semi-tractor trailers have you gotten off the roads that aren't competing with us during rush hour, aren't trying to barrel through a signalized intersection, whatever the case may be? Like, there are some true efficiencies, both air quality as well as transportation costs.
On average, rail to semi-truck per single trailer on semi-truck is 5 times away. I load trains, and those pups, they've got electric track mobiles, but the power is still generated somewhere. It's just you can decide we'll have the diesel generation somewhere where it won't get trapped in two mountains with a cataract at the south end and a lake at the top, so it just lives there. We can decide to generate the power down by Holden or Delta and then utilize it, up here.
Absolutely. And these are some of the points that we would bring up, in some of these meetings that would try to get shut down by certain protesters. And it's like, listen, that pollution's already happening. I mean, whenever there's a storm on California's coast, it's a day or two and it's here anyway. Well, folks, that's exactly what happens with the pollution generated there. We're breathing it anyway. So if you want to take away the anyway and you want to make it a better alternative, then you want greater fuel efficiency, and you want to be able to have trucks not have to stop at signalized intersections, get them straight from a port on the back of a rail, have it be nonstop to the greater Salt Lake vicinity and where it gets customs inspected instead of off of a ship into a rail yard, take it, off site to the customs to be, inspected and have all of its weigh bills, inspected and verified, then put it onto a train anyway, or another truck. I mean, it's just a very inefficient way to solve our consumerism.
I agree.
like it. I like it. And I like that satellite idea. I really do.
Now, that's what Greg Hughes was running on too when he was here giving his speech. He was talking about how he can place the inland ports in strategic locations instead of just one.
I walked into when we did this show knowing nothing about it, and I've watched a few interviews you've done with it, a few things that Greg Hughes has done, and growth is going to happen. We can't avoid it, but we can aim it.
Yeah,
if we plan for it right, it could even benefit.
It's about managing, not controlling.
Yeah, and there's another thing is as we do something like that, and we build a new port versus the ones that are established on the coast, we can look at these new environmental, like, do we go electric? Do we design a port around efficiency now? Where those ports were built before that was a concern. Now we can design it around pollution efficiency.
Mm-hmm. We can learn from somebody else's example,
and we can reinvent, or not reinvent, but we could invent a new method for making it cleaner and safer.
And a lot of these industrial tugs and equipment, like for example, in Salt Lake City Airport, Delta Airlines, they've moved from diesel tugs to push those airplanes to giant battery operated tugs that don't cause any pollution.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's a pretty cool opportunity for Utah. And it's kind of disappointing to see the environmentalists not looking at the environmental side of it correctly, from my perspective.
Okay, I won't invalidate your perspective, but they're looking at it correctly from theirs, right? It's just, again, how many of them have begat children and grandchildren? Like, they are part of the problem that they perceive to push back against. And that's why good collaborators are needed more and more, right? Is to bring people together with divergent views to be able to say, okay, well, let's sit down. This is going to be really uncomfortable, but you're going to have to prioritize, and you're going to have to prioritize. We're going to have to meet somewhere in the middle. You're going to have to prioritize what you want to win on, and you're going to have to therefore inherently say what you're willing to give up likewise. And can we find some easy ground on some of those things to give up? And sometimes leadership, just like parenthood, sometimes you just got to say, well, here's the information I have today. And by the time you've got your fourth child, it's a very different experience than when you had your first, and it is what it is. Leadership sometimes is about, well, I've got the information I've got, and you want chicken strips tonight and you want mac and cheese, and I've got the ability to only make one, and this is what we're going to do tonight. And you try to do what you can.
Yeah. Well, I think we probably ought to round the show up now. We're going on almost 2.5 hours.
Wow. It seems like it's flown by.
It
had
does.
fun, huh?
It goes fast.
Yeah, it's been a good show. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
We just want to throw out there, if there's any, if you ever need to get any more information out, feel free to reach out. We can throw these together.
Thanks.
Dang impromptu. We have no problem with it. I do want to have you back in and talk about this inland port and some of the ideals about it. I like the idea. I like it. I like pulling industry in, and I like the idea we can pull it into the state and into the county in a means where it can be only a good thing, where we can control where the pollution happens. We can have the foresights like that. And I think that when I heard you say that on that one interview, that really perked me up, got me thinking about what they could do. And there's a lot of space out along I-80 that is unused or hasn't been used in a long time.
Well, if you want to talk about other job creation ideas or tax-based development, Deseret UAS, I sit on the Salt Lake City International Airport board. Happy to go over, what we're doing at the main airport, as well as how that may influence what we do at the Erda airport. Some opportunities there. The Romney Group and some of the ideas that they had early on, spoken with the county. They're annexing into Grantsville, so they're not going to be in the unincorporated anymore. That's already starting to eat up some of the Erda incorporation plans there. But anyway, happy to talk about, a whole other program. Do you have the ability to share some graphics that if we either digitally had a map or something like that, we could talk about some very specific elements, even the Ochre Expressway, a road that we're hoping to bring off of 201, SR 201, directly into the valley on the east side of the railroad tracks. Be happy to talk about some of those projects that the county's involved
Is
with.
that one they're building right now?
Nope, that's Mid-Valley Highway, and that's going to come right down the middle of the valley. Ochre Expressway is our intention of creating another avenue down into the valley that would circumvent 36. It'd stay east of the railroad tracks and keep 201 going east of the railroad tracks.
So it'd come in kind of like onto Drew Bay or some
much further east.
Oh, but further east.
Yeah.
So it'd come in.
That's the general idea.
Back behind Pine Canyon and Lincoln.
You had to compromise with the gold mine, didn't you? Or the copper mine?
Kennecott. Well, so that's what makes it tricky. And I'll leave this as a teaser, sort of a commercial when we come back, but to this topic. But they had a development that they were proposing at the north side of Stansbury Park and south of I-80 called Adobe Rock Ranch. And that got referenda, got enough signatures that all of a sudden, where they were a willing participant, they were willing to help us figure out how to go across their land to separate 201 and come in independently into the valley. They're like, well, you know what? Like, we're primarily a mining company and we don't feel like we really need this land. So we were going to, do some residential development with it. And we think we could plan out something really nice here. But if you guys don't see the inherent value of scratching backs, then, and I'm oversimplifying how this conversation took place, but to make it real quick as a teaser to come back and talk about it at greater length, understandably, they're like, well, you don't want to be a partner with us, citizens, then, where's our incentive to let you encroach further up our mining operations on this other side? Because first and foremost, we're a mining company. That's what we do. And Rio Tinto needs to see how this is a benefit to the community. Well, the community doesn't think we're a benefit to them, then there doesn't seem to be much of a partnership there. So yeah, that's the teaser, and it's more involved than that, but it involves the real potential of being able to have another main corridor or artery in and out of our valley. So
yeah. All right. Well, we'll close this up now. Thanks, Shawn, for coming in.
Yeah, thank you.
And everything else. And if we do get any messages that come across, we'll make sure we note them. And when you come back in and talk to us about either inland port or future growth, whatever, who knows?
Flying cars and everything else.
People may decide what we talk about.
Sure, you bet.
It happens. All right. Thanks very much. And we'll have you in again real soon.
Great. Thank you.